Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, brother. This is Rhit Moore, past master and current secretary at Fort Worth 148.
And this is Gabriel Jagush, master mason with Fort Worth Lodge 148.
Well, it's good to be back. We're down Grant this week. He's duty calls. He's got to work.
Yeah, he's with us in spirit.
So maybe you set this one up to where it'll go out where he can listen to it on his way down to Corpus. Because he said he's leaving at 2 this morning.
Yeah. Oh, no. He'll get it. They release at 12:01 in the morning, so he'll get
Sweet.
it. Well, ladies and gents, we wanted to start off with a couple of clarifications to last week's episode where we discussed the law book, and I kind of wanted to lead off with, are Texan Masons allowed to be communists? And that's kind of a weird specific question, but it has to do with one of the interesting laws that we found in the 2017 law book. Those weren't in the 2014 law book. Specifically, Article 508 in Title V is what we were looking at. And it particularly caught our attention because of items 4 through 6, which deal with familial abandonment, cohabiting with lewd women, and being a member of the Communist Party. And there were a bunch of other things that were kind of had us turning our head going, what? So, and there were a couple things that were missing that were in 2014's Title V, Article 505, that aren't in the 2017 edition anymore. So Rhit sent some emails and did some sleuthing. So, Rhit, tell us about this. What's going down?
Well, I mean, at this point, basically, they're looking into it to see what actually stands. As of right now, I've been told that what we voted on reverted us back to the old Title V, to where those very well could be added back into the law, and the other one dropped. But we're still waiting on final clarification for that. So follow the law in the 2017 Grand Lodge law as it stands right now.
So, gentlemen, you've heard it. If you're affiliated with the Communist Party, you may want to keep that under your wraps. Or if you cohabitate with lewd women, I don't know.
So also another clarification I had was on Grandmaster's decisions, because when we talked last week, I didn't know how they were ratified and made law. And a brother went to the leadership training there in Dallas, and of course they cover that there. So if you can make it to one, get on it. But Grandmaster makes a decision, which is a clarification of a law, an existing law. It is included in the jurisprudence report at Grand Lodge, which is voted on and approved and ratifies those as essentially like an addendum to the law, making them legally binding. So know your Grandmaster's decisions as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get a copy of that.
Everyone should. I've been doing this 14 years, and I just got them not too long ago. 8 months ago.
Yeah. So our next two questions are legalistic in nature. Given last week's subject, I kind of wanted to touch on something similar, and one of them was kind of something that I saw posted on Facebook, and then the other one was something that a brother and I were actually having a conversation over a few drinks. We kind of didn't know, hey, what is the standard for this? So the first one is, what are the rules for using a holy Bible, a holy book other than the Bible during degrees? And so, because some people have said, well, you have to put the Holy Bible on top, but they can still support it underneath. Some people say, hey, you can put the book of their faith on top of the Holy Bible. Hey, you can't use another book other than the Bible, or you can use a book, but it has to be closed, And so there's a lot of that going around, and it's in our Grand Lodge law with a little bit of room for interpretation. And so the direct quote is, religious belief, a firm belief in the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, and the divine authenticity of the Holy Scriptures is indispensably necessary before a candidate can be initiated. But this Grand Lodge does not presume to prescribe any canonical books or what part thereof are inspired. It is the policy of this Grand Lodge to permit a candidate whose religious persuasion is based upon other than the Holy Bible to be obligated upon the book of his chosen faith, and the same may be situated upon the altar in front of the Holy Bible during the conferral of the 3 degrees of Masonry, in which event all esoteric references to the Holy Bible during the conferral of the degrees and the lessons appropriate thereto shall be substituted with the book of your faith. So the kind of thing there is, so you would have it in front of it, so you wouldn't put the Holy Bible on top, or you wouldn't put the Holy Bible on bottom. They'll be obligated on that book in front of it. So I guess just don't overlap it, and they do have that flexibility. So that's
and when it comes to it being open or closed, if it's a smaller book and it doesn't stay open, there's a certain degree to where it's going to have to be open.
Yeah.
But they can help with that. So,
and additionally, the law doesn't specify whether it's open or closed. So if you can find a passage that is equivalent to what you see in the Holy Bible, because depending on the book, there is some level of cross, reference, I guess. I don't know. So, if you want to open it to an appropriate passage, that can be done. I think or at least it seems like there is room to allow for that in that law.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if Grand Lodge law is silent on it, it's permitted.
Yep.
So doesn't say you can't, so you can.
Yep. And then the second question that we had for this episode was, can I be a Knight Templar if I am not a Christian? And my answer, after doing some research, is not in Texas. Now, there are some states that permit you to be a Knight Templar if you are not a Christian, if you swear to defend the Christian faith. And so people say, hey, I'll defend the Christian faith just like I'll defend my Judaism or my Islam or whatever. In Texas, however, we've got 3 rules in the statutes and regulations of the Grand Commandery Knights Templar of Texas. And they're all in Division 2, Chapter 40, Chapter 47, and Chapter 49. And so the first one is Duties of Members, and that is Article 260. It lists a whole bunch of member duties, and one of them is to support, defend, and practice the Christian faith. And then it lists a bunch more duties, and it says, it shall be the special duty of all members of a commandery to attend the conclave call for the observance of Easter, Ascension Day, and Christmas ceremonies, and also patriotic observance. So you got to practice the Christian faith, and they also call you to attend several Christian religious observances. The other articles are 304 and 312, which respectively deal with the petitions. So qualifications of petitioners, anyone, and subsection B is who is a firm believer in the Christian religion. So that's who's eligible, among several qualifications. That is one of them. You have to be a firm believer in the Christian religion. And then in the contents of the petition, what they're dictating you actually sign off to, the petitioner shall declare that he is a firm believer in the Christian religion, that he has read the petition, and that he has personally signed the same. So, at least in Texas, you must be a Christian to be a Knight Templar. So, just kind of clarifying that, because that was a question that I saw posted, and I thought that was really kind of an interesting question to ask, because there are jurisdictions where it is permissible to not practice the Christian faith and still be a Templar. So
break it down for me. How far can you go into the York Rite? Because that's part of the York Rite, isn't it? The Knights Templar?
Yes. So the best way to describe my favorite thing is that the favorite description I've ever heard is that there is no such thing as the York Rite, actually. The York Rite is just a collection of rites that all kind of have prerequisites for each other, but they're not really all the same system, because some of it is wildly different from each other.
Because I didn't realize chapter and council were 2 different meetings.
Yes, so it's 2 different organizations. Usually, everybody in that organization will be serving in parallel. So if you are the thrice illustrious master of a council, you will also, at the same time, be the most excellent high priest of a chapter. But that is not always done. They are two separate organizations, though. So, in the what we call the York Rite is generally considered to be chapter, council, and commandery, and some people will also include Blue Lodge as the first thing because there is a very nice, neat transition from Blue Lodge to chapter in the U.S. In the U.S., we basically have a York Rite-based Blue Lodge, and the story of craft masonry is told from Blue Lodge through chapter to council. If you have completed council, which has a prerequisite of chapter, which has a prerequisite of being a master mason, then you have completed the story of ancient craft masonry. That, like, I tell everybody, if you are a master mason, you should go through chapter and council. There's no religious restrictions on that. You just got to believe in God.
Gotcha.
There are going to be some references that are distinctly Christian in nature, but there's nothing going to be required of you, and it's not going to be something that, like, is demanded of you to believe in or anything like that. It's just kind of very obvious references to, like, the King of Kings and things like that. Which, it's not, terribly offensive, but yes, it's fine.
Yeah. No, it's just not, specific and secular like that. So you do chapter, council, then commandery?
Yes. And so, and commandery does require, and in Texas, you must have gone through council. Not every state requires going through council, but in Texas, you have to have gone through chapter and council. And commandery does require you to profess the Christian faith. So, at least in Texas.
That's where the buck stops if you're not a Christian.
Yes. And so, but there's a lot of non-Christian guys that are involved in chapter and council and have a great time. And I encourage everybody, regardless of whether they're Christian or not, to go check out the York Rite, because there are many things, the chapter and council are rich systems, with amazing degrees, beautiful stuff. It's wonderful. So you don't have to join the Knights Templar. That is strictly optional. Are they cool degrees? Yeah, the orders are incredible. Do you need them to finish the York Rite? The York Rite, you don't really finish it because there's always more. There's other stuff in there because you have other organizations than those three. Like I said, the York Rite is not really a rite. It is like a loose confederation of like a bunch of different systems, which we have called a rite. Scottish Rite, for example, it's much more appropriate to call Scottish Rite a rite as opposed to York Rite. But anyway, that's totally wandering off topic.
Well, so I learned something. That's interesting. I think, the more brothers know of how it's laid out and, comfortable they feel, more likely they are to join something like that. So good info.
Yeah. And so I tell everybody, hey, you don't have to be Christian to join the York Rite, but, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of chapter and council. So go for it. And there are things, to not give anything away, but the story of Blue Lodge is not complete when you finish Blue Lodge. It is completed in chapter and council. So
teaser.
Yep. So it's real cool stuff. Highly recommend.
Sweet.
It. So,
where are we headed next?
Let's get to the main content. This is episode 26. And so I think we're tentatively calling this one "I'm a Master Mason. Now what?" So I guess Rhit, this one's kind of your brainchild. What kind of inspired this one for you?
Well, for some time now, I've kind of turned off of the thinking that membership is a problem. When our lodge stopped focusing on bringing in new members and how we do that and started focusing on ourselves, things changed drastically for the better. And, guys started coming and joining. We're doing more degrees now than ever. But it really dawned on me at one point to where I'd heard ad nauseum every idea of how to get membership in, and we weren't taking care of the members that we had. So you become a Master Mason, and now your job is to try to build the numbers up. And I've never heard a guy walk in the door and go, "Yeah, I'm interested in Freemasonry because I want to help y'all build your membership."
Yeah. Can you
I've
imagine
never heard that.
how soul sucking that would be if that's all we did? You know.
Exactly. And when it is our primary focus, and 60 to 70% of our time is spent on ideas of how to get new members, and we're going to do this out in the community to, get us out and get new members and stuff like that. And it's missing the point, because there's a way to get those guys so charged up about Freemasonry that they are your guys that go back out into the community and bring new guys in. So that's what kind of sparked this idea and had to have this discussion, because, as you're going through the degrees, you're just getting schooled up on how to perform and act as a Master Mason. And that's when the real work starts. But guys are just usually left kind of, well, what now? Okay, I'll go do this appendant body, or I'll jump in the lineup, or whatever it may be.
Which,
but there's
there's nothing wrong with doing that, but sometimes you feel a little bit aimless,
Exactly.
And I guess kind of on, like in a very general sense, to tie it to a general subject, I listened to a great TED Talk recently about game theory and how it applies to the Cold War. And I looked at it and I was like, man, we need to apply this to how Grand Lodge and how different lodges operate and how individual Masons operate, because we're going from a finite playing field of game theory where, okay, we have very clearly defined strategies and very tangible goals. And when we achieve that tangible goal, we move on to the next step in the strategy. Finite playing field. And then all of a sudden, you turn in your master's proficiency, and you're a traveling man now, and all of the tangible goals, all of the defined procedures kind of go out the window, right? You're suddenly left kind of with, okay, now there are no defined rules. Obviously there's the Grand Lodge law rules, but in terms of what you want to do and how you have to do it, there are no rules anymore. The rules are adaptable.
Yeah, there's no lesson plan for a Master Mason.
And there's no goals all of a sudden. The goal is to keep playing the game, right? There's no checkpoints anymore. Your endeavor is to keep going. And so that, you've hit the infinite playing field as opposed to the finite playing field. And then it becomes more about, okay, what are your values? How do you apply these? And then you have to create goals for yourself. And so that's kind of based off of the conversation that I had with Rhit earlier, before we started recording and started emailing each other. That's kind of the sense I got from this, that this is what we're looking for. What happens when we as Masons? What happens when we transition from the finite playing field to the infinite playing field? So a little bit wordy, but, that's been on my brain all day.
Yeah, and so many guys are just left kind of in the wind, fluttering in the wind, and they're like, they want to know more, they want to do more, but they haven't been properly coached how to make that happen, and they'll do something else, like I said, jump in the lineup or something, and there's nothing wrong with that for sure. But if you're wanting more light by becoming junior steward, I got news for you, buddy. There's some good stuff that comes from feeding your brethren for sure, but there's no secrets revealed in junior steward or any office from the junior steward on up to the east.
As junior steward, if you learn how each member of your lodge likes their coffee, when you're a worshipful master and you go to visit them and you remember how they like their coffee, that might be something special. I don't know.
No, don't get me wrong. You can create all kinds of memories and good moments, but are you, are you going to get?
I know what you're getting at. I'm just being difficult. But I guess let's say, all right. So I'm totally okay. Let's say let's rewind, and I say, okay, I've turned in my proficiency. I'm a traveling man now. How cool is that? My dues card is on the way, everything like that. I just learned the Tyler's Oath, so if somebody tests me, I can go visit and, be vouched for, or I guess prove myself without having to be vouched for, that kind of thing. But I'm totally lost and I don't have any goals. Where do I start?
So, in your ritual, course, I've got the monitor right here, and there's a part in it that I want to read because we practice speculative masonry. We're no longer operative masons. And it specifically says in plain writing, this isn't part of the ritual, what speculative masonry is. And by speculative masonry, we learn to subdue the passions, act upon the square, keep a tongue of good rapport, maintain secrecy, and practice charity. There's 5 things right there that makes up speculative masonry. So that's where your goals ought to come out of. And of course, any one of those, you take any one of those, how do I subdue the passions? Look back in your ritual. Temperance, prudence, read through those. Practice charity. You need to look in the back of the book, in the glossary. Do you remember what charity means?
Yep.
To the Mason.
Yep. Divine love.
You got it. Universal benevolence. So, of course, definitely pick up your monitor, but look back into your ritual, because that's where it all starts. We get caught up into the performing acts in the world. But if you look at all 5 of those, they are all internal actions, things that you do, so keeping a tongue of good rapport, that's all about your character. Subduing the passions. As much as you may want to subdue my passions, Gabe, you're not going to do it. I'm going to have to do that. You know what I mean? And practice charity. I keep bringing that up because we're going to talk about the real form of charity as we know it today. But in the Masonic sense, we're talking about that universal benevolence of when that brother needs a hug, you're not too proud to give him a hug, or, you open the door for somebody walking in. Simple things like that, acts of love that are put out into the world that make it a better place. Again, that's all you, man. Nobody else can make you do those things. They can certainly show you the value of them. But in the end, you have to figure out how you're going to perform that. And in our ritual, it's a how-to.
So what kind of goals would you say that one, okay, so I go back and I look at the ritual and all that. What kind of goals am I likely? Obviously everyone's going to come up with different ones, but what kinds am I most likely to set as goals if I look back to the ritual?
So here's another good example of something we did in Lodge. It's been a couple of years now. We picked a working tool that we would use that month and specifically recall moments to where we used it and how we used it. So it may have been the 24-inch gauge at one point. So we were held accountable by our brothers to come back and share how we utilized the 24-inch gauge the last month. So on and so forth, common gavel, trowel, all that stuff. And that's a great goal to set. Just pick your working tool and say, hey, I'm going to use this thing 3 times today, or whatever it may be. I'm going to apply this working tool and I'm going to jot down in my journal how I used it. And then go from one virtue to the next. After you get done with the working tools, start with the cardinal virtues and perfect points of initiation and work through all of that.
So basically start reflecting upon and contemplating different lessons from the degrees and all that. So
the reflection and contemplation, it comes first, of course, but you've got to put these things into action and be accountable for those actions. And eventually it becomes second nature. But if you're not saying, all right, how am I using that 24-inch gauge to best use my time? Have I helped a distressed worthy brother today? And that doesn't mean you got to go over and help them. Maybe a phone call, write somebody a personal note. Who knows? Have I done my usual vocations and had proper refreshment and sleep? It's so simple, but yet so tough. It's like counting calories. The concept on paper is simple, but try doing it, It's tough. And that's what a master mason is. It's not easy, because like we said earlier, the lesson plan's out the window, because as an EA, you need to learn this questions and answers, and we're going to explain the meanings behind them, maybe do a little paper presentation. Same thing with Fellowcraft. And then Master Mason, after turning your proficiency, they haven't been told to go back and reflect on that ritual, because that's the new lesson plan.
Because we don't really do a whole lot of contemplative masonry. That's kind of a term that's been thrown around lately, but only as of kind of recently. And so, would you say that this kind of leads to a lot of burnout?
Oh, 100%. This is exactly what burnout is, where it's all caused from. I mean, it's 100%, because anybody that's been a Mason for a little bit and somebody's walked through that door and you ask them, that's a question you should. Why do you want to be a Freemason? No matter how they cut it, it's grandpa was a great guy, their friend was, whatever. It all boils down to they're wanting to improve themselves. And we're not giving them the opportunity to, because first, it's hard. And second, it's uncomfortable to really lay your feelings out on the table in front of a bunch of other men. It's not easy to do. And you've got to create the environment to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. There's I heard an interesting story from a brother from Utah who was talking about the level of burnout and kind of general unhappiness he was experiencing with the craft at a certain point in time. And it got to the point where, and I thought this was really powerful, that he drafted a letter of demit, stamp, address, everything, ready to go. And he had it, sealed up and everything like that, and he kept it in his glove box so that at any time, if at any time he felt that he was just tired enough, he could resign from everything and just demit entirely. And I thought that was really interesting. And he's still involved and he's still active and everything like that. But I thought it was a very interesting sort of strategy. Like, hey, if this ever does get to be too much, I'm gone. And I feel like that's a very fair sort of thing, because this is something we do in our spare time. There's other things in life to take care of.
No, and it's so easy with the internet, because people call them distractions, but Netflix and Facebook and all. But 70% of my time on Netflix is watching documentaries, trying to better myself, which lead me down rabbit holes. So we have to fill that time with value, and if we're doing that with just trying to fill membership, guys they're not coming here for that, so we've got to figure out a way to add value, and the membership will take care of itself. Which reminds me, when I got off the phone with a brother that went to the leadership training, he was so fired up. And after we got through talking, that's when I emailed you this, because he talked to me about how he builds his lodge up. And I told him, I said, the first thing, or the only thing you need to do, is what you want to do, what you enjoy most about Masonry. Get after it, because you're going to try to go in there and start things that people won't help you with or won't participate in, and you're going to get burnt out with it. Mm-hmm. But if you enjoy it, you don't get burnt out with it. I gave him the example of Family Day, because I was the same thing. I didn't type up a demit letter, but I was wondering what was going on. Our lodge just collapsed about 7 years ago. And I was like, what am I doing up here?
Yeah, is it worth my time? Yeah.
Exactly. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to do a Family Day, to where every year the lodge is going to pay for a big water slide. You've been out to one now, Gabe.
Yep.
And me and my family are going to enjoy it, because I've got 5 acres. I'm lucky. We set it up here at the house, and everybody comes out. Well, the first year there was like 8 people that came out. And this last year was year 5, and I think we had close to 60.
Yeah, it was an incredible sort of event.
It's a great time to get to know the brothers, but I do it because I want to do it. And I bet I rode the water slide 100 times, and my kids were on it for 12 hours straight, it seemed like. And they get value out of it. I get value out of it. I enjoy doing it. It's happened for 5 years now.
Yeah, so you have to kind of go find what makes you happy. And I guess, is that kind of what we want to call master's wages? Like that sense of satisfaction and happiness? Or are we off base with that assumption?
No, I think master's wages cover a scope of things. And that's absolutely one, to where those thoughts and memories that make you a happier man, that's master's wages.
And that's kind of one of those things. It's all about the intangibles, and that's one of the really rough parts about motivating yourself when you're, I like the way that you described it when we were talking about it earlier, like you got to be a self-starter. And that's one of the difficult parts about the concept of master's wages and the satisfaction, because the vast majority of this, the rewards are very intangible. Because happiness is, I don't think you can measure that, that'd be a tough one to measure.
You're hitting the nail on the head, because you can't go put on paper that you're enjoying masonry this much, or you're not enjoying it. The master's wages are something, it's hard for people to wrap their head around, but that's what we're working for.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a pat on the back. You're not going to get a pendant. You don't get a title. But you get that moment, especially on your deathbed, to look back on a life full of great memories. So in the meantime, it's going to build your character. There's no doubt.
So, well, I guess that kind of leads us into, how does Freemasonry build your character? How does it make good men better?
So that's the thing, is that, you are who you hang out with. There's no doubt about that. But if Freemasonry's done right, that's why I read that definition of speculative masonry. If it's done right and you actually go at practicing it, and it's tough, and it really and truly, it probably gets harder and harder, to be honest. But if you practice it and work at it and chisel away or gavel away, as it should be, common gavel, it's going to improve your character, because you're going to see the value in the lessons it's trying to teach, from, brotherly love, relief, and truth. Those are things that just ring eternal. It's human nature for us to want to lend a helping hand, or to meet people on the level, or to be truthful, because we've all done it as a kid, to where it's like, I'm going to lie about this or that. I remember one time I signed my dad's name on a discipline report I got, and I was a nervous wreck for like 2 days, and I finally got caught. It was relief, So there's value in those tenets, and if you actually practice them and contemplate on them, like we said earlier, because that's how you're going to figure out how they best work into your life, because how I use the common gavel may not work for you. While we're all chipping away at superfluities, you may go at it from a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be something that you sit down and actually internalize and then practice.
Right.
All about your actions in the daily world.
Yeah. So it doesn't work without you, because you have to be involved. I mean, we're here to... the way that I fundamentally like to describe Masonry is that it is an organized effort to save the world one man at a time. We can't do that unless that one guy wants to sit down and take that time. We're dependent on the individual, which is it's a tough place to be as an organization when you rely on people, because people are unreliable, and that's not a bad thing. It's just human nature.
You got it. And I've heard many Masons say, I just want to leave it better than it was before I came, which after they die, or, maybe they borrow a friend's tool or whatever, they want to return it in better shape, clean, all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what Freemasonry teaches us, how to maximize those moments to make this world a better place.
Mm. And
from the very small to the very big moments.
Yeah, and everybody's going to have different moments like that, and different experiences and engagements and things that they practice. And thinking back to something that Roberto Sanchez was talking about when he came and visited our lodge, and then something that Chuck Dunning, Brother Chuck Dunning, has also written about, is that there's kind of 4 aspects to the process of improvement, the things that we engage in that improve us. And so you'll have fraternal engagements, whether that's reaching out to a distressed worthy brother, or if that's going to a table lodge, right? Or if it's just hanging out, talking on the phone with a brother from lodge. And there's the sensory experiences, right? Like the physical sensations you're going to experience during degrees. Or, like that the goosebumps you hear when somebody does a really good lecture or Bible presentation or something like that, or the overwhelming physical shock that you can experience when some of the more interesting parts of the degrees happen, or even if it's just the sweat on your brow from working out in the sun because you're working for a charity of some kind and you're passing a can around or something. And then you've got the third one is emotional experiences, which ties in really closely to the degrees, but the way that you feel after a degree, or when you accomplish something with your lodge and you know that you've made the world a better place, and you've got that kind of rush. And then the fourth one would be the intellectual practice, right? Whether it's studying esotericism or getting more involved in philosophy or gaining a better understanding of your own religious beliefs, that intellectual practice that you have to work at it. That's why it's practice. So so improvement. But basically, I kind of call it like a 4-pronged attack. It's that fraternal engagement, the sensory experiences, or what some people call the physical experiences, the emotional experiences, and the intellectual practice. And, kind of all of those 4 quadrants are what you'll find. They're here in the craft. You just have to find them and engage in them, because they're there, but some of them you have to pursue actively. But, different people are going to gravitate towards one of those more strongly, and that's where they find value in lodge.
Yeah. And you have to be ready to support those guys, because I am not a fundraiser guy. I did not join lodge to raise money, but some guys love doing it, and I'll help. I'll support that as long as they don't mind learning their degree part really well.
Yeah. Because I'm not going to tell anybody what their masonry is, as long as they don't tell me what my masonry is.
You got it. And that's what we're there for in a lodge, is to support each other. And you start learning the value of it. And all of a sudden, you don't mind going and helping them when they need a hand, whatever reason it is. Like when we went and moved Steve, there was 6 to 8. I don't even know. There's a lot of brothers there.
A lot of people showed up all at once. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. So you start learning the value in those kind of things. And it all comes out of these teachings. So, that's the thing I hear a lot, is that we need to do more charity work in the community. And you are going to make yourself a better man by doing charity work, just by the reception you get from it. But it's not what we do. We are not a charity. Can't write off your dues. You can't write off donations to the lodge. We're not a charity.
Yeah, but we're not a charity. We're just charitable.
You got it. If you're doing your part right, the introspective part right, and learning the lessons of the degrees, you're going to practice charity. You're going to donate when it's needed. You're going to go, whatever it may be, help at the special needs. It's just going to happen. You're going to see the value in it from your contemplation on the degrees. That's what a Master Mason does. And then you, as a man, from the lessons as a Master Mason, go out and do charitable acts.
Mm-hmm. And you learn all of this, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it that you're already going to have, but there's a lot of it that you learn in Lodge, and that's the best place to learn it. And it'll change you.
You got it.
It will really fundamentally change you, whether it's in the Lodge or outside of the Lodge.
And that's the point I want to make, because I know many lodges that do many charitable things, from feeding first responders to this or that. And I want them to reevaluate why they're doing that, not stop doing it, because we should band together as brothers and do huge charitable acts. It should be one of our main goals. But it should be because of what we've learned from the degrees, not because we want to put ourselves out in the community and get a new member.
Yeah.
So don't do your blood drive and have petitions there with you. That's not what it's about. It's about you doing your responsibility, and they'll come get that petition. I mean, at our lodge, we make them wait 6 to 8 months, and they stick it out. And, so they're anxious to join. It's just got to be there. They got to get the value out of it.
Yep. So I love this question that you wrote down. Can you name a time at Lodge you left and knew you'd never be the same?
This is crucial, and every single Mason should dwell on this. If you cannot recall a time that you went to Lodge, and if you tell me your degrees, well, that's a given. It should be. If you didn't leave all 3 of your degrees a different man, they weren't done right.
Yeah, that's pretty much a given. So I guess the qualifier there is name a time at Lodge, not during a degree. Yeah.
Yeah, not during your degree. So after your Master Mason, absolutely you should be able to recall those moments, if not multiple. Because if you're not, you need to start creating the environment for those to happen.
Yeah, and you should know, and not only should you be able to name a time, but you should also be expecting for that to happen again and soon. Those moments should be every time. Yeah, it's not going to be every time, but they should happen not infrequently. I'm not going to say all the time, but they should happen more than, a blue moon.
Well, and it can be as simple as sitting in Lodge with a World War II vet who stormed the beaches of Normandy on the anniversary of D-Day. It was like the 75th anniversary or something. And I sat in Lodge, just got goosebumps thinking about it. Huge moment in my life. And that was just by chance. Well, not chance. That's a name for your dog. That's another story though. Yeah. To something as deep as we had on a Monday night. And I won't go into what we discussed, because that's like Vegas. What happens there stays there. But I mean, still today, it's just we had such an eye-opening discussion about our craft, and it was like, holy smokes, can't wait for this again. Those moments should be not few and far between, but coming almost rapid fire.
Yeah, and part of that only really happens when you can kind of trust your brothers, right? You and whether it's to keep their your secrets, or to not judge you, or all these things, you got to trust them to welcome you. And so one of the questions you're going to want to ask yourself as a Master Mason is, do you feel you can open up to your brothers with the most intimate of secrets? And Rhit, you've got an amazing checklist here. It's just beautiful stuff, because you should be able to, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can't open up, just a stated meeting or two ago when we did Sam's eulogy, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and we were loving on each other and picking each other up. And then you go rewind a stated meeting before that, and we might be giving the Worshipful Master a hard time because he goofed on a gavel or something. We go from one end of the spectrum to the other because we're so comfortable with each other.
Yep.
And we've got that secrecy. It's so crucial to maintain secrecy and what goes on with those brothers, because there's things we share with the world, absolutely, but there are discussions we have with our brethren that we don't go tell people about. You just don't do it. unless they explicitly tell you, hey, let everybody know about this.
There's stuff you don't want to talk about,
Yeah.
And not even because it's spooky dooky ritual or anything like that, but just because it's the common decency,
Yeah, because he laid his heart out on the table, and you don't want to go and say, oh, yeah, Jimmy Jack or whatever. Even if you are saying it in a caring fashion, it may come back to him, and he hears that you told another brother that, and he didn't want that brother to know for some reason. And now he's never going to talk to you again. I mean, confide in you in that way again.
Because there's stuff that you shouldn't tell anybody about, except for the brother that told you,
You got it. And that creates that environment of secrecy to where men start to feel comfortable. Because God forbid somebody figure out that we're weak, and vulnerable.
That's one of the things that's kind of interesting because of the way that the male psyche is, portrayed or expected to be acted upon in society. We end up kind of men tend to end up kind of emotionally stunted. And it's one of those things that it puts us in a very dangerous place because we no longer know how to behave appropriately. We have no support system. And that's one of the things that's really important about Lodge and being able to trust each other is now you have that support system. And you got to be able to, I'm thinking back to the episode we did with David Bindle where he said, you got to be able to trust each other enough that you can cry at dinner with these guys. Yeah. And I feel like that's an amazing sentiment.
Look, when that moment happens and you finally question everything that you have believed in your life or something major that you believe and you find it to be false now, that moment can be leave you very vulnerable, and you may end up in tears, and you should feel comfortable enough to have brothers to express that around.
Mm-hmm.
While that may happen rarely, the environment should be there. And if it's not, work on it. It doesn't get built overnight, but that's what guys are coming for because they want real interaction. I can get on Facebook and interact with 600 friends in a blink of an eye. But it's not that true human to human interaction. And this generation, they're so hungry for real, something that is real. And, you get them in here and you do the degrees on them and then plop them in a officer's chair and say, okay, enjoy. And they haven't been trained. It's over for them.
Yeah. And that's how you kill a Mason's heart, I think.
Absolutely. Because I heard somebody say the other day that they thought it was funny that a lot of Masons were business owners. And, while not all Masons own their own business, it is kind of a testament to the mindset of the type of men that are drawn to this craft. Because if you look at any Mason, they're driven, they may not own their business, but they're still driven in their work. And those are the kind of guys we're getting that don't mind doing the work when the pay is there.
And a lot of them will help you. Like when you're looking for that, and you can ask them questions, and you're not going to get that judgment or anything like that because they know that you're asking them as a brother. That's like, hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z, and it might be something in the realm of Masonic things. It might be something in the realm of family, or it might be something in the realm of business. But these guys are used to having to take charge of their own lives, and that I feel really translates, or I guess resonates with what we, with what we might want to call that self-starting spirit that you see that is necessary for Masonry to kind of succeed in the individual.
Yeah. It's the whole thing that they have to come up to us in the first place. We can't recruit guys. And I love that they have to come to us, which already signifies a ton about their character. Mm-hmm. Just think back to that moment. If you were, because we get a lot of candidates that are off the internet they don't know a soul in the building. And they come walking into this old, mysterious fraternity and they're nervous. But they still did it. It took some gumption. It
Yep.
kind of reminds me of that time you first asked that girl out on a date. And it's like, oh my goodness. Oh my God.
Yeah.
You had to really work yourself up into it.
And you're still kind of terrified even when it works.
You got it.
Yeah.
So,
And that's one of the things that, like, when somebody does come in from the outside and doesn't know anybody, and then they get to know everybody, and it's not just people you hang out with only at lodge. You'll hang out. You end up hanging out. Well, in a lodge that is doing well, that is healthy, you're gonna end up hanging out with your lodge brothers outside of lodge, right? And that's one of the things that is great for these candidates or prospects that walk in and they don't know anybody. Through the process of getting to know us, they're going to get to know us outside of lodge too. And when they do finally get initiated and become brothers, then we already know them. We hang out with them. We like them. It's amazing. It's one of those. So that's another way to look. When you're looking for value in your lodge, you also want to look for non-lodge fraternal activity as well, I think.
Yeah, there is something different to doing an entered apprentice degree on somebody that's come up to the lodge and they've been there for a month and you barely remember their name, as opposed to a guy that you've known for 6 to 8 months. You know his wife's name, his kids' names, what he likes, where he works at. You know all these things about him, and he is actually your friend now, and you get to share in that experience of making him a brother. It's so much more special for everybody, especially him. There's no doubt. And to kind of tie back into the self-starter, a point I wanted to make is that I don't think that we're engaging them enough. I'm guilty. I've said it 100 times that you get in what you put out into Masonry, and it's 100% true. But Ricky Cox, he's got a great saying. He calls people on that, and he's like, that's just basically leaving them to the wind.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous thing to tell prospect. It's a great thing to tell Master Masons, because that's true. Once you're a traveling man, you do get out what you put in. With EAs and fellow crafts and prospects, I don't know.
Well, and while you can say that, you have to be training them. And that's what really opened my eyes to that, is that, he calls everybody on it and says, we tell them that and they just drop them into the pool of Masonry, and they don't know how to put anything into it to get anything out. So they have to be trained, and they're going to need to know they're going to have to invest a lot of themselves into it, but they don't mind if they know how to do it. I mean, that's the whole point of the self-starter.
Yeah.
These guys are the salt of the earth. They want to work, but it has to bring them value. So you may go ask that guy, hey, do you mind being an officer? And he says, yeah, I don't mind helping you out, because that's the kind of guy he is. That's the kind of guy you got in lodge, and that's who you want. But then they become an officer, and they're still not becoming a better man from it the way they want to and have those real experiences. You've got to create those times in lodge when that can happen, so that guy will stick. You'll get the most out of him, because he'll dig in deep. And
that's kind of when you have to really look you really have to look at the lodge as a classroom of sorts. It's a learning environment. And so going through the line can be a learning experience. But the lodge, regardless of where you sit in that room and how high up, the lodge still needs to be a classroom for you. You need to be learning every time you go to lodge, right? So if you go to lodge and you walk out and you're like, it was a nice meeting, but I didn't really learn anything, then your lodge is not, to you at least, it is not a classroom, and you need to be finding stuff. One of the questions that we've got on our little sheet here is studying morality encouraged and promoted at your lodge? And I would go beyond morality and say also philosophy and other things, and practicing those values, like are practicing what you've learned. Is that part of something that's encouraged and promoted? Do you feel comfortable asking questions about this kind of thing, because studying kind of implies that you don't know it yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we got to go back to that. We kind of got to tie back to that idea of, do you trust these guys? Is this a judgment-free environment? And so if you're going to use your lodge as a classroom, you got to trust these guys. And it kind of ties back, but...
No, it's 100%, because if you feel like you're going to ask a dumb question, there's a problem in the environment of your lodge. If you feel like there's not a brother you can go to ask a question about the workings of the craft without looking like a dummy, you need to work on the environment, because we're there to learn. That's the whole point, So in order to learn, you're going to have to open yourself up. And it takes a lot of trust, because it may be a dumb question like, why don't we walk between the altar and the worshipful master? And, I've asked that before and got the answer. That's the way we've always done it. I've studied with guys where I'm like, what does that question mean? Or, what's that answer mean? Don't know. Let's just keep studying. You said it right, So if that's the case, and I'm not promoting for you to leave your lodge, but find a mentor outside of your lodge that you can become that well-informed brethren. So when the new candidates come in, you're that guy that they can come to and not feel like a dummy for asking a silly question. Because if they can't ask silly questions, they're not going to ask tough questions either.
Yeah. Well, and kind of now that you've mentioned that, where is, I guess where or what is the danger in the phrase, we've always done it this way or that way, however you want to put it? Like, tell us about the pitfalls there, because I feel like that phrase is like inherently dangerous, right? But
absolutely,
why is it dangerous?
I can't remember what author had said it, but isms, you should steer clear of isms. And that, to me, is a form of fundamentalism, to where you are not opening your mind to the possibilities of what could be. And if you're not practicing Masonry right. It's universal benevolence. So you need to take that idea and be able to look at it from a 300 and, all angles, 360 degrees, and see all the possible outcomes, and be open to the possibility that there's a better way of doing things. Nobody has ever promoted changing what we do in our craft, but how things are done in lodge, or what's presented in lodge, those kind of things, those can change. What we do at a stated meeting, how we present the minutes, all those kind of things can be conformed to where there's a universal consensus. Hey, that's the way we want to do it.
Yeah. And so that kind of opens that door. Like, you have to be able to be open to ideas and criticism, right? It's an ego thing, right? Like, it's you got to silence that inner voice that screams, no, I'm right about this. Yeah, you got to kill your ego.
What tool, works for the ego? You pull out those compasses and you keep those desires circumscribed, because something may be so awesome and valuable to you in Masonry that you think everybody needs to do this or be a part of it, or this is going to fix it. And you got to be open to the possibility that it's just something you may enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but if it helps you improve your character, then great. Like, maybe your thing is charity work and that helps you improve your character, or maybe your thing is ritual, or it helps you and that's what helps you. Or maybe your thing is looking through the law book and helping brethren make informed decisions, and that's what helps you grow as a person. But, everybody, you can improve your character by doing this and doing that and doing X, Y, and Z. But you got to do it, and you got to also let other people do their own thing, have their own learning experiences in the classroom of the lodge.
You got it. And you have to be willing to recognize you're getting paid master's wages. You're not going to get a title. You're not going to get a pat on the back. but you're going to be a better man, better Mason, happier. That's what we're here for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that you're winning, if I can quote Charlie Sheen, if you are doing those things that make you happier and better. Don't, while you share your ideas, don't try to force them on anybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happens when you don't see improvement? Like, you're not happier, you're not better. A lot of guys leave when that happens. How do we prevent that? Why does that happen? What gives?
So for me, that is a form of us not guarding the West Gate well, and Masonry, the fraternity doing its job and pushing guys out that shouldn't be there. As crass as that may sound, if they are literally going to tell me after 2 or 3 years of being a Mason that they see no improvement, that they're not becoming a better man, and this is a bunch of hoo-hockey, this or that, I will open the door for them. See you, my brother. Because it's not a journey to where I'm going to make Gabe better. I can try as hard as I want, but I'm never going to make you a better man. I can show you the value of improving your character, but I can't make you a better guy. So in the end, if they're not getting improvement out of the craft, don't try to talk them into staying, because they're not self-starting. They're not digging in. They're not doing what they're supposed to.
Well, so then I guess one of the things, for guys that aren't seeing that value, maybe you do have to try and at the very least get them to see the lodge being a classroom, right? Like maybe you might not be able to get them to say, okay, well, Masonry's great. It's wonderful. We all have an amazing time, because you're never going to win like that. But maybe you might be able to get them to see it as a classroom. How do we implement that idea of making the lodge a classroom? How do we convey that sort of sentiment to a guy that he went through the degrees, and he really doesn't see the value. He's a year in, 2 years in, whatever, and he's starting to peter out because he's just like, man, you know what? I'm not getting anything out of this. How do we convey that idea of, hey, this is a learning experience?
No, that's a good point, because nothing's black and white. There's always gray areas to where that guy may be a Master Mason for 3 years, and he's really worked on learning the meanings behind all this and contemplating it all and taking it back to lodge to where it all solidifies, and that environment's not there. So he's done all his due diligence, but his brothers aren't. So that guy is the guy we want. You do have to be able to identify that if he's part of a lodge that doesn't have the environment, you got to latch on and help him build that environment. And that all starts with an outside mentor, like I talked about earlier, finding somebody because if there's nobody in your lodge that wants it to be that way, you got to go elsewhere to get mentorship, not leave your lodge. And then start taking that stuff back, seeing who is interested, because you're going to have an idea. And I guarantee you there's going to be, if you've got 10 active guys, there's going to be 2, maybe 3 other guys that'll be interested in what you are. That's just a pure odds of it. But you have to learn how to start implementing it. I hear all the time, we're going to start doing education at stated meeting. And it's like, to me, that's the exact wrong time to start it if you haven't been doing it, because it won't last. You'll get more negative Nellies jumping out of their seat than anything, while you may get a few pats on the back. The negative Nellies will beat you down if there's just 1 or 2 of them.
Exactly.
I've seen it happen again and again. So just ease that part in that you like, and start creating that culture with other like-minded guys. But step 1 is finding that mentor outside of lodge, because if it's not there, you need to get with a guy that has been there and you see success in their lodge, and they're everywhere. They're all over. People like to think that we're in a dismal state of affairs, but you can quickly see there are many lodges, Tarrant County, Dallas County, Houston, Austin, everywhere, that are really digging into speculative Freemasonry.
Yep, that they're doing real well about that too. And
yeah.
so, when you start that journey, right, you're treating the lodge as a classroom. You're going to find a mentor, all of these steps. Like, this is just getting the ball rolling, though, right? This is kind of tying it back to that idea of the finite playing field and the infinite playing field, right? We've gone through the structure of the 3 degrees, right? We went through that school, that finite playing field of the 3 degrees, and now we're in the sort of terrifying freedom of being a traveling man. We're on the infinite playing field. And so now we have to take actions. We set our own goals, right? Like, well, I value improvement. The value I hold is improvement. The goal that I'm going to create for myself is, okay, go find a mentor, right? And so you start creating these, and it's all about getting the ball rolling. None of these goals are about accomplishing things that are super tangible. All the goals you're going to set are going to be towards building towards something else. And so once we've started that process, we kind of begin this mastery of the self. And, one of the things that we've talked about is improvement by going through the line, right? Rhit, you're the past master. Yes. Does the title make you a better man?
No. Not even close. While going through the chairs did make me a better man, the title is nothing. It makes me a member of Grand Lodge where I can vote there. Otherwise, it's pretty much meaningless, in the grand schemes of making me a better man. But some of the greatest training I ever received was going through those chairs. But I had brothers that supported me all the way up to the east. That's when everything collapsed.
Oh, geez. The dark days.
The dark days. Yes, we were not properly guarding our Westgate years ago.
Yeah.
And we learned the hard way.
So
you got to watch them.
You mentioned that, that you had a lot of guys to kind of support you on your way there. Did they have power to improve your character? Or, can a supporting role improve your character? Or is that just like a facilitator?
No, it's 100% that, those guys were not only my brothers, but they were friends. We hung out quite a bit, and I learned many valuable lessons from them, good and bad, what to do, what not to do. Wouldn't trade those interactions for the world. So they absolutely had power over changing me because I had no problem opening myself up to them. Mm-hmm. They were good guys.
Your lodge can make you better or worse.
You got it. And that's the thing is that, we're humans. Not everything goes perfect. So sometimes bad situations are going to arise that, you may get a slap on the wrist. You may get in trouble, whatever. But the only way you come out of not a better person is not contemplating and figuring out what went wrong and how you fix it for the future.
Yeah. And, you already answered this, but when you're looking at the future, does this get easier, harder, stay the same? Is it cyclical? Like this whole process of mastering oneself, what does the difficulty change?
Well, in my opinion, it gets harder because you hit levels that you don't think you can surpass, or that you're not progressing like you did at one point. Because there was a time in my life in my mid-20s up to my, lower 30s that I was just really, manhood was all coming together for me. And a lot of it had to do with Freemasonry. And as I got older and up until now, that process slows down and you have to work harder and harder at it. It's like when the bodybuilder finally gets bulked up, for him to add a little bit more tone onto his biceps, he's got to work twice as hard as he did before. Mm-hmm. And burnout will set in with a lot of guys at that point. And you'll just kind of back off. Oh, no, I'm just going to be a past master and come to lodge at stated meeting and vote on this or offer my opinion here. And you're not working in the quarries anymore, so you're not going to get paid those master's wages.
Right. So the disillusionment, it kind of gets harder, huh?
Yeah. A good example of my own journey is when I got my A certificate. I had spent the better part of a year and a half just submersed in learning that work and memorizing that work. It's what I did as a hobby. Anywhere I went, anywhere I was working on it, lunch break, whatever it may be. And when that was over, it was kind of like, okay, what now?
Yeah.
What do I do now? And you take the next step. You sit down and you contemplate, what's the next thing I need to do?
Right. And it's a matter of self-discipline too, because sometimes it's hard to sit down and go, "Hey, I'm stuck. I need to change something. There's something wrong with what's going on here. I need to sit down and think seriously about what I'm doing and find out what the next step is." But that takes discipline, because you have to do it regularly too, before things go wrong.
And I hear the excuse all the time, and I use it all the time with myself. I just don't have time to do that. And one of my mentors told me at one point, said, "Well, you got all the time there's ever going to be." It took me a couple of weeks, but I finally realized that he's right. All the time you're ever going to get, you've already got. And you've got to really figure out how to maximize time. And while you've done something a certain way and you don't think you can work it in, really, if you sit down and if it adds value, you can figure out a way to add it in.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess because sometimes, you're going to be, you're going to stall out sometimes. What benefit is there to persisting through one of those stall outs?
Oh, that's the perfect example is, so the seed sprout, you plant the seed, the tomato seed, whatever it may be, put it in the ground. The first thing it'll do is pop out of that shell. And that was the easy part. Now it's got to push through the actual dirt and pop it open to where it can get out to the sunshine. And that is the hardest part. And that's where a lot of guys quit. So if you want this tree to bear fruit, you got to push through the dirt. So those are the moments when you're like, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. Those are the moments that if you persevere and keep pushing through, you're going to get paid bukus of master's wages. They're going to come, in one lump sum as opposed to weekly kind of thing. So those are the major moments that when that happens, you need to tell yourself, oh, this is one of those moments. I've got to persevere. I mean, you can boil it down to an athlete. The Olympic athletes, they don't stop when they get tired. They keep practicing.
So how do you anticipate, or I guess, how do you anticipate and or diagnose when things are going wrong on your journey of self-mastery?
Oh, you can easily tell it. An example, because there are times when I go to lodge and I'm going to lodge either frustrated or leave frustrated for one reason or another. And you have to, instead of continuing to go down that rabbit hole of why you are frustrated, you have to be able to stop and identify that moment, that this is a moment of correction. This is where I make things better for me, potentially my lodge, potentially my family, whatever it may be, because it applies across the board. You have to be able to stop and say, something's not right. Because if you have a problem, it's just that. It's your problem. So if there's something causing consternation within you up at night or whatever, and you think, I can't believe this guy did that to me, it's still your problem. You've let them in. How do you correct it? You got to identify that moment and say, okay, I've got a problem. What do I do to make sure this is resolved and it doesn't happen again? And it may end up being that you just got to tuck your ego in, that it was all an ego thing. And you're trying to force something into the world that shouldn't be forced in, or into your lodge, into your family, whatever.
And that's kind of like one of the reoccurring ideas that I've kind of been trying to practice more actively is this idea of take your ego and kill it. You know, it's
Tuck it away.
You know,
for sure.
Well, because ego leads to so much suffering. It's I really love this. One of the Buddhist concepts of attachment causes suffering, and I'm paraphrasing massively here, and I'm using big generalizing sweeps, but the ego, we get attached to our ego because it feels good, and that ends up causing us a lot of suffering. And so if you find your ego and you kill it, and you start absorbing the world around you and the lessons you've learned, then you're going to be so much happier,
Absolutely. And while the ego does play a part in getting things done, because it's kind of the seat of passions and desires, your ego will kind of fuel that fire anyways. You can't let those overtake you. That's the whole point of the compasses. While you should be passionate about something and you should have a desire to do things, you have to keep them circumscribed. Mm-hmm. And keep yourself in check. And that, to me, that has a ton to do with the ego, because it'll kind of fan those flames to where, if you propose something at your lodge or maybe at the Grand Lodge level, whatever, and it doesn't get passed, and you're like, I'm from the brothers, they don't know what's good for them. I can't believe they did that. The gun thing, good example, or, the
so
one
many
day
people got so upset about that, and they blew it so, and yeah, I'm not saying they don't have a right to be upset about that, because it's fine. If that's what you believe is wrong, then you believe that's wrong. But there were people that were talking about sending in letters of demit and everything like that over just the fact that this had happened. And I think at that point it is strictly an ego thing. It is very much a look at me and what
you guys have done something so bad.
Yeah.
Y'all are so horrible. I can't stand to be around you anymore. And because I'm right there with you. You should, if you think it's wrong, you have the voice and the platform to proselytize that. But at the same time, it better be well articulated.
And and with all things circumscribed.
You got it.
Yeah. We can't be calling other brothers bad Masons and threatening to demit and saying that the craft is no longer the craft and stuff like that, because that's losing sight of, you just took your compasses and threw them out the window. It's not just the gun thing. There's been other stuff like that, but it's
those are just the hot topics in Masonry. But you just threw your introspective journey out and put the Masonic journey on other brothers.
Yeah.
Because laws come and go. That law very well could be overturned at one point. Who knows? But to get hung up on something silly that perturbs your Masonic journey, you just can't let it happen.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, that, kind of where we've been talking about this whole idea of introspection. And when you experience turmoil like this, so let's say, something does go down at Grand Lodge and a law changes and it really deeply upsets you. That's the time to kind of look within and practice mindfulness, right? You want to be kind of actively aware of, well, this is how I feel, and these are the emotions I'm experiencing, and you have to pick up the emotions and look at them and let yourself feel them and stuff, but then you have to also let them go too. You have to be an observer in your own mind if you want to kind of do this whole idea of circumscribing. You have to pay attention to how you feel, and that applies also to, am I stalling out? It's slightly different, but also the same.
No, I love the way you put it, because you have to let the emotions happen. You have to feel them. But it kind of made me think of a fighter, that if a fighter goes in and loses a fight, and then in his next fight, all he's thinking about is the fight he lost, he's probably going to lose again. Yeah. So you have to let that go at some point, figure out, just like the fighter does, how do I prevent this from happening again in the future? What can I do? All right, I got all that settled in. I'm ready to go when that issue comes up again. Now back to my Masonic journey.
Yeah. And, with that, it gets easier and easier the more you practice Masonry, right? And not just, ritual, but Chuck Dunning has this really, Brother Chuck Dunning has this really interesting sort of insight that, and it's not just his insight, like this is a pretty common theme, but he's the guy I picked it up from, is that when you practice the 4 cardinal virtues, temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice, and the 3 divine virtues, faith, hope, and charity, or, charity as that idea of divine love or love without bounds, it's a transformative sort of action, right? So if we're being mindful and we are contemplating this emotions that we're feeling and the way that we are acting and where we are on the journey, and we use those lessons, and we've already kind of touched on this, if we use those virtues and the 4 virtues and the 3 virtues, and we think about the tools and we use them mentally and we practice those lessons, that's our own little personal alchemical reaction. We're changing. And so, we got to practice it. And that's one of the interesting things about setting goals as a Master Mason, is that one of the goals you need to set, and honestly, I would say the most important goal that you need to set, is that practice is not what gets you to the goal. Your goal is practice. You need to practice that. That's your goal, right?
You got it.
And
because you're always going to have room to improve.
Right. And that's and again, I know I've yapped about this again, time and time again, but it's that whole finite playing field versus infinite playing field. On the finite playing field, you had easily definable goals. You progressed whenever you achieved a goal. And then staying in the game is dependent on achieving those goals. On the infinite playing field, staying in the game is the goal, because that, it's, you have everywhere to go from here. There's no limit to it. So when we say that idea of like, okay, staying in the game is the goal, then our goal needs to be, our Masonic goal is practice Masonry. And so if you are practicing Masonry, then in a sense you've already succeeded. Although it may not always feel like it.
And it won't. That's what we talked about earlier. You're not going to get paid master's wages every 10 minutes, but you have to be able to identify those emotions as well, to where when you have a moment flood over you, you may get goosebumps, or you may just say, man, that is really cool, or that brother really enjoyed that degree. You have to identify that you were a part of making that moment special, and that is a memory packed into your brain that's going to make you a better, happier man, which is what it's all about. It's about the only thing, you're going to take with you your whole life. So just as we talked about identifying those emotions that are bad, that you feel your ego, like you feel the heat and you're getting upset, you got to contemplate those as well. Same thing with the good moments, and go and consciously say, hey, I just got paid some master's wages. That was $15 worth, or that was $1 million worth.
Yeah.
Whatever, because they're going to be different levels of it, but learn to identify it, because if you learn to enjoy those moments, you'll go, you'll dig into Masonry like you never believed you could.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's rock with those moments.
There's a great, because we're talking about master's wages and getting your mileage out of it. I'm going to lean back on Brother Dunning's writings again, and he has this great allegory regarding knowledge versus practice and the road to being happier and wiser. And he's got this allegory involving sports fans, right? And one guy who knows all about sports but doesn't play, and the one who doesn't know a whole lot, but he does play. And so like the first brother is a relatively sedentary sports fan who knows everything about sports, the trivias and stats, and he knows a lot about strategy and everything like that. But he doesn't really play sports. But people do ask him questions all the time because he's so smart and because he knows so much about sports. And the second brother is an active sports fan who doesn't know a whole lot about sports. I mean, he knows what teams he likes and he watches some sports, but that's not really his, that's not how he jives. Like, he likes to actually play. He grew up playing baseball or football or whatever, and he's still physically active, goes to the gym, and maybe he's still on his church softball team, things like that. Which one of the brothers is probably going to be in better health? The sedentary one or the active one? Probably the active one. And who would you ask about how to get healthy? You know, the active one, probably. And who would you pick to be the lodge's, you know, if you look at these two brothers, who are you going to pick to be the lodge's softball team captain?
Probably the active one.
Right. And who would you rather be more like?
Yeah. And definitely.
I'm leaving you, you know, and obviously, you know, we're leading you to the active one. But Brother Dunning asks us to look at this analogy in the sense of sports are esotericism, right? And like acquiring knowledge and doing the research and everything like that. So the sports in general is esotericism. And then, but playing sports is the practice. It's the contemplative practice of actually using that knowledge. And then the physical health of each brother is the mental and spiritual well-being. And so it is important to go seek knowledge, and it is important to learn things. But if you don't practice them, you're going to have a really hard time being happy. And I think that's kind of where we touch back on master's wages. Like, you're not going to be happy if you don't practice masonry.
You got it. There's a great quote that I can't remember who said it, but it's all you. It goes, if all you do is think, all you have to think about is thoughts.
Ooh, I like that.
So you got to put it into action for sure.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion this week. The fraternal quote that I have for this week is also from the laudablepursuit.com, and it's: the bottom line of Masonic teaching is that through the journey of our degrees, we learn that divine truth can't be understood by the human agencies of education or dogma or rational thought, or by the evidence of the senses. It has to be perceived directly. And my brothers, it enters into us by the path of initiation. All of this is pretty heady stuff. Men come into Masonry to learn to improve themselves. If they are coming here for any other reason, then we are failing to represent with honesty what our organizational purpose is. Men come to us to learn. The lodge is the receptacle, the personal space, the sacred environment that will either facilitate their learning or prevent it. To me, this brings up another question for all of us. What kind of facilitator is our lodge? And that's from Brother Robert G. Davis, 33rd Degree Grand Cross, in his essay, What Come You Here to Do, on thelaudablepursuit.com.
Oh, Brother Bob Davis, he's a fantastic man.
Yeah, and so I looked at that and I was like, man, that really resonates with me and this whole discussion that we're having right now.
Yep.
So, Rhit, tell me, closing thoughts, what do you think? What do you want to leave the listeners with?
Look, you got to do this for yourself, man. You know, if you're looking for accolades or for titles, you're in the wrong fraternity, although we have a lot of titles and a lot of accolades to give away. That's not what it's all about. Got to recognize when you're getting paid those master's wages and dig into this thing, you know. So if you don't already, find you a good mentor, lock up with them. It doesn't have to be somebody you can see physically, you know, with Facebook and everything else. Reach out to somebody. Don't be scared, because they're willing to be tried. I guarantee you, if you see they're an active Mason that impresses you, ask them those questions, get to know them. I'm sure they'd be glad to mentor you. And don't be scared to be a mentee.
Yeah. And brothers, you know, I'd like to leave y'all with kind of the idea that we have to be mindful of where we are on our journeys and what we feel. And I feel like, you know, if you say the goal is the reward, is the journey, is the process, then you're already in a good place. If your goal is to practice Masonry, and your reward is to practice Masonry, and the journey is practicing Masonry, you are already succeeding. And that's something that you are going to get a lot of mileage out of. If you say, you know what, the way that I'm going to be happy in Masonry is by actually practicing what I learned, then you're already succeeding. That's
Yep.
I feel like the foundation of it. And also, importantly, we're a fraternity. You know, you can't do this alone.
No. Yep.
You know?
No, that'll put a lot of gas in your tank, I
Yep.
should say, if you just practice masonry.
Practice it. So, brothers, if you want to reach us, you can find us at www.fortworth148.org. You can find us at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook. Our email is it's info148@fortworth148.org. And if you live in the 64th District of the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Texas and you want to promote an event, please reach out to them at 64th.org. That is 64th.org.
And also, if you live in the 64th District, come get the travel gavel next Monday.
Yes, come take it.
We got it. Let me know if you're coming. I'll cook extra for you. Well, we've missed you, Grant, but this is Rhit Moore signing off.
And Gabriel Jagush signing off.